In this video, we're talking all about inherited IRAs and how you can maximize the amount of money you're going to get out of them while minimizing the amount of taxes that you have to pay while withdrawing that money. As we know, all the money coming out of a traditional IRA gets dumped into your income. And so the amount of income tax you pay is directly correlated with what bracket you're in and how much of that traditional IRA withdrawal falls within what bracket. So let's jump into a quick calculator right here and I'll walk through the different strategies and the different mistakes. So here we have the tax brackets, and let's just go over. I'm going to say the word fill up a bracket a lot, and I want you to understand what that means. I'm going to just set up a pretty common scenario we see. Let's say someone who has $100,000 in active income and they're inheriting an IRA of $500,000. Now, the most common scenario is a parent passing down an IRA to a child, or a young person, could be a grandchild, but someone that's much younger than them. And the parent either is or isn't taking their RMDs already on that when they pass away and pass it down. And that doesn't really matter too much for our strategy here. But that is a nuance I just wanted to mention. So the most common situation is someone that falls in the 10-year liquidation window. And what that means is they have to get all the money out of the IRA within 10 years. And so here's where people run into some mistakes. Some people hear that, they see the money that they've just inherited, and they say, well, I'm just going to take it all in year one. I won't have to worry about it. It's off my plate, and the money will be, at its smallest level, so I'll get taxed the least, right? And that's not exactly true. So they drop $500,000 into their income, and let's get back to our brackets down here and understand what that did for them. So here, this gray, you have their active income, and that pushed them as a single filer into 22% bracket at the highest. So as you know, with taxes, each section, you get taxed at the tax rate for each section. So I know these numbers are small down here, but 10% is the lowest. So you're taxed at 10% up until $11,000. Then above that, we go to 12%. So all the money above that goes to 12%. And then the last bit of your active income is getting taxed at 22%. And now comes the IRA withdrawal. So some of it's 22, some of it's 24, some of it's 32, and then there's a large chunk sitting in 35% tax bracket. So their effective tax rate in this case, which is sort of like the average tax rate that they're paying on all of their income here, is 32%. Mistake number two is those who say, okay, well, I'll let this compound in the IRA all the way up until year 10, whether or not they have RMDs. The RMDs are usually very small, so that type of person can make this mistake as well. The RMDs, I don't think I mentioned this, are if the person who you're receiving the IRA from was already taking RMDs, you have to continue those RMDs. But in terms of withdrawals, that rate usually tends to be fairly small and doesn't take a meaningful chunk out of the overall balance if the account is growing at really any rate. As long as that's invested, the RMDs, the withdrawal rate is often so low that the money at the end is still going to be a large chunk. So this person in this case allowed the money to grow all the way until year 10 and then took it out, right? Because it compounded tax free. So you want that, the biggest possible pile, that'll maximize your withdrawals, right? And it's actually worse than case number one. And you might say, wait a second, how's it worse? I'm seeing that we're getting almost 600,000 out, whereas in case one, it was mid threes. And what you have to take into consideration here in our calculator in this scenario is the calculator is keeping track of all the compounded growth in this case. In this case, it's not. But if you took that 339 out in year one and invested it in the same way that this money was invested, you'd have a bigger number at the end here than the 589. And so you're paying $300,000 to get the 589 out. In this case, you're paying 160, and then the growth on the 340 would be a lot higher than 589. So you're left with a bigger pile. You're paying more taxes in this case. And you can see what that does here. It pushes so much of the income into the 37% bracket. So you really get hit hard there. Now let's look at the right way to do it. And this is going to require some estimation and some calculations on your part, but you should update this every year. You should understand where you're likely to fall with your active income, and then also how much is in this account, what rate it's growing at. You really want to, like, the whole goal of this is trying to not get left with a big chunk in any one given year that you have to withdraw and get pushed up into these higher brackets. So you want to spread it out. If you're in the RMD camp, you're going to likely be taking a lot more than those RMDs, so it won't really matter. And if you're not in the RMD camp, you're still going to take sizable chunks each year in order to pull out the maximum amount of money in each year within these lower brackets. So in this case, they're getting year one withdrawals only up a little bit into the 24%. And so you could even consider, depending on the size of your IRA, how much more you'd want to take. But when we say the term fill up a bracket, what we mean is take out as much income up until that bracket that doesn't tip you into the next tax bracket. So in this case, they were able to take some in the 22% tax bracket and then some in the 24% tax bracket. And so based on the size of this IRA and their income, that makes the most sense in year one. You're going to get some growth on the account, and that's expected if it's invested. But this money that gets withdrawn can get reinvested right back into a non-qualified account, and you can keep pacing it. The idea in this scenario is getting the maximum amount of money out inside these lower brackets. And so that's why we space it out more evenly, but you still will probably increase a little bit as the account grows. And again, don't get confused by this final number. You're saying, oh, it's 500,000 versus scenario number 2. Isn't that better? And again, the calculator isn't taking into account each withdrawal being reinvested. If it was, you'd be in a lot better place. So get ahead of it, run the numbers, figure out what you think you're going to be making across the 10 years, or at least in the very next year, and get a withdrawal on the books that fills up some lower brackets for you, but doesn't push you too high. Markets do fluctuate. The growth rate on the account is going to fluctuate, and that's why you want to map this out on a year-by-year basis. That's what we do for our clients. So it's a balancing act based on their active income, the account growth, how you can get as much money out of the account as possible at as low a bracket as possible and still not be left with a huge chunk of money at the end. But you have to run the numbers, and you have to run the numbers yearly, if not more. That's what we do. If you want to talk more about your specific situation, or maybe drop your numbers into this calculator, have us walk through it with you, we can definitely set up a call. You can head over to pasnau.com. That's PASNAU.com. We talk about stuff like this and planning all the time. It's really what we love. If we haven't met yet, my name is Ben Edmond. I'm a certified financial planner. I'll also drop my email here, ben@pasnauinvestments.com. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. Let's get into the second part of this video. I wanted to also just drop in front of you the rules for what type of recipient you are. There's going to be different rules depending on what your relationship was to the original account owner. And so I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but I will show you the layout here so you can pause the video, read through, figure out where you fall and what rules might apply to you. On the left-hand side here, these are called eligible designated beneficiaries. What that means is the 10-year rule doesn't apply to you, and so you don't have to get all the money out of the account, but there's nuances for each situation. So spouses have their own rule set, also minor children. This is an interesting case if you're very similar age to the recipient, so you're within 10 years or older than the person the original owner of the IRA. You're not going to have that 10-year liquidation rule, but you may have RMDs based on your life expectancy. You also have minor children, which is one that is pretty common, and the 10-year rule does start. It just doesn't start until they hit 21. So these are just things to know. The right-hand side is much more common, and this is where the 10-year rule does apply in case one, the original owner was already in their RMD period, required minimum distributions, and so they were already required to pull money out of the account. And so the IRS makes you continue those minimum distributions. That's not going to do anything to our strategy. You're actually going to likely pull out a lot more than those minimums, but it's just a good rule to know so that you can stay within the bounds of the IRS's rules. And then rule number 2 is they hadn't been taking minimum distributions yet, so they weren't old enough. And so you don't have any required minimum distributions, but you do have that 10-year rule. Again, in both scenarios on the right-hand side, our strategy is still going to apply, and it's really not going to get in the way of anything, but it's good to know where you stand and make sure that you're following the rules. On the left-hand side, our strategy might look a little bit different. for a surviving spouse. For example, you may roll, and in most cases, you're going to roll that IRA into your IRA and treat it as your own. So you're going to have RMDs, and you're not going to have a 10-year rule liquidation. And so you're going to treat that account a bit differently. Again, for minor children, chronically ill, disabled, or if you're of a similar age to the original owner, you may not decide to start liquidating that account and instead run it as if it was your IRA on your life expectancy. There are different strategies that apply there, but most commonly the 10 years and spreading it out, making sure that you can take the most amount of money in those lower brackets and not get left with a huge lump sum at the end. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, our website is pasnau.com, pasnau.com. Feel free to jump through there if you want to book a call. I'd be happy to talk through any questions you have on this, and also shoot me an email, ben@pasnauinvestments.com, and I'll see you in the next video.